Hello out there. I'm Eric Lorber. I'm the director of Rain Taxi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 20th Twin Cities Book Festival. We're on the third day of this virtual festival, and there are so many great things about it to explore. We've got 19 of these live author events, and of course, if you miss any, you can catch the replay at any time you like. We've got a handful of pre-recorded presentations as well in our Minnesota Writers Mashup and our new chapbook launch. And we have an exciting exhibit hall filled with great publishers and organizations and authors, all of whom are ready to share with you what they've been releasing lately. We'd like to actually share with you just a little taste of what's going on in the exhibit hall by showing you a quick presentation by one of those great sponsoring exhibitors. Check it out.
Fox Point Publishing represents authors from a diverse range of backgrounds. A high school teacher, a high school student, a retired chemist, a podcast host, a nurse, a utility dispatcher, a stay-at-home mom. We help these people bring their dreams and ideas to life and to you, the reader. Children's books, poetry, science fiction, fantasy, comedy, horror, romance. Every genre, written with love and professionally produced for book lovers of all ages to enjoy. Read a Fox Point book today.
Super. Thanks to our friends at Fox Point Publishing for their support. And now it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. As a graphic novel fan, I am so excited about it. This session focuses on growing up graphic, and it includes some stellar authors who are coming onto the screen as I speak. I'll introduce them briefly. Jerry Craft is beaming to us today from Connecticut. He's the creator of the award-winning syndicated comic strip Mama's Boys. And of course, he won the Newbery Medal, the Coretta Scott King Award, and I think several other prizes for his graphic novel, New Kid. On a personal note, I want to say that I also spotted his work in a terrific anthology called APB, Artists Against Police Brutality, which, as we all know, is continually relevant. And I want to cheer all the artists who speak out for that issue. Jerry's latest book is a companion to New Kid called Class Act, and you'll hear all about it today. Hope Larson is checking in from North Carolina. She is the author and illustrator of many books, including a graphic novel adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time, which spent 44 weeks on the bestseller list and snagged her an Eisner Award, the comic industry's highest honor. Her newest release, All Together Now, is the much anticipated sequel to her 2018 smash hit, All Summer Long. And Ursula Murray Husted is the Minnesota artist in our group. She's a fan favorite in these parts, and she is now celebrating her debut graphic novel, A Cat Story, which will no doubt be loved by young and old alike for its heartwarming tale of feline friendship. By the way, Ursula also created, you can see it over my shoulder, the Twin Cities Book Festival's 20th anniversary commemorative poster. And that's something you can check out on our merch page. It's really beautiful. Sorry, we can't zoom in. Moderating our session today is Linda Stack Nelson, the trusty editorial assistant and my right hand and everything here at Rain Taxi. Like me, she has an abiding passion for graphic novels, so I'm really delighted that she can lead the conversation today. I want to remind all our audience members that you can ask questions at the bottom of the screen. I know the panel would be glad to answer. You can buy books by all the authors by clicking the link down there. And if you choose, you can donate to us. We are a nonprofit, and we love bringing you this free festival, but every dollar we get from you helps us, well, to bring you the next one. We're so glad you're here. Thank you all for coming, and take it away, Linda.
Thanks, Eric. And again, thank you all so much to these amazing artists and writers who are joining me on screen today. All of your books are absolutely fantastic, and I've loved a lot of your work for a while, and some of it I discovered very recently, but I'm even more excited about because of that. It's like a fresh excitement. So I am so happy to be here. The title of the panel is Growing Up Graphic, and the reason I wanted to title and focus the panel that way is because all of you have created work that, while it is written for a middle grade audience, it also really appeals to adults and to older readers. And you've written work that's been recognized as appealing to older readers. And I think that that's a real, I just thought the word symptom, which is a much more negative version of what I'm trying to say. But I think that's a sign of the way that the world has changed the way it views comics and graphic novels over the last few years. And I think that it's still changing. I'm also a bookseller in the non-COVID world. And I get the question a lot. I work at a children's bookstore specifically. So I get the question a lot, like, you know, my kid really only reads graphic novels. Like, how do I get him to read real books? And yeah. And I know you all must get versions of that are probably, hopefully, slightly more polite, given that this is what you do. But I get it all the time. And it's very frustrating to me because I was a kid who spent what I now consider to probably be a horrifying amount of money on Archie comics when I was in my pet sitting days. And they really fostered an understanding of not only like visual art, but also of literary art. And they brought me into a lot of other graphic novels that I read after that. And I think that the value of graphic novels has become more and more understood throughout the last few years, but it has a lot further to go. So I sort of wanted to open the discussion with just asking each of you to say a little bit about what your book is about and show us a favorite panel just so we can get a sense of it, and then we'll dig in. So I'll just pop to my left and Hope, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Sure. This is my most recent book, All Together Now. It's a companion book to All Summer Long, which came out a couple of years ago. And All Summer Long is about a girl who is trying to figure out how you become a musician and how you start a band. So All Together Now is about starting the band and how you navigate creativity and creative differences and making art with other people. And I picked a favorite page because just panels, I don't think about just panels. I think about pages when I'm making work. So this is a Go-Go's inspired dream sequence that the main character is having. And it's based on the video for, blanking on the song name, but you can find it online. So that was a fun one for me to draw.
That's awesome. Thank you, Hope. And I'll drop it down to Jerry then.
Okay, so Class Act is the companion book to New Kid, which New Kid came out last year. And it's about Jordan Banks, loosely based on my life of wanting to be an artist, wanting to go to art school. Parents don't want you to go to art school because they don't think that you ever make a living as an artist. So it's his 7th grade year. And then in Class Act, this is the companion book. So it is his 8th grade year. And now it follows one of his best friends, Drew, from last year. And what I did, because I love graphic novels and, you know, middle grade books, I did, for my chapter openings in this book, I did references to other books and graphic novels. So in this one, this is Ashley, who bakes Drew lots of pies because she just learned how to make sweet potato pies. She's white, he's African-American, so she's trying to show that off. And she's overdoing it with the pies. So I did a takeoff, and this is called The Life of Pi. And it is colored by my good friend Mashindo Kumba, who is absolutely amazing. And he just really went to town on this. So I appreciate his workmanship.
That is a gorgeous page, and I have to say, I loved all those chapter openings, and it always made me excited to get to the next chapter to try and figure it out. There were only a couple that I didn't see and immediately get, but I love that you had a little bit of an index in the back for those of us who were sort of staring at the omelet page, trying to figure out what was happening.
Got it.
All right, thank you so much. Ursula, do you want to talk a little bit about your book and show us a little snippet?
Oh, sure. So A Cat Story is about two cats in Malta who are looking to find a home. And Scylla thinks that the good life first lies with people and then lies with a garden she's heard about in stories. And her friend Beto just doesn't want her to be hit by a car. And so he goes with her. And the whole thing is sort of told through the viewpoint of the cats, but then also told through the passing through of artwork through history. So you have these passages where the cats will leave their panel and then walk through and incorporate themselves into art that is showing how they sort of experience stories and understand the world in the framework of how human beings have shared stories and experienced the world through art. So it's sort of a love story to comics because it's a comic that lives in the gutter space, the space between panels. It's middle grade, so it's, you know, a little further out of the gutter than you might expect, but also a love story towards art history and art museums. So
I really love that aspect of the book, and I have a question about it that I will not get ahead of myself like I just almost did before this question. But it really reminded me as well of My Favorite Thing is Monsters, which is one of my favorite graphic novels that has like such beautiful inclusions of other fine art pieces as well. So anyway, before I got ahead of myself and didn't ask you about your books before I started ranting about how graphic novels are real books, I want to start actually by letting you rant a little bit about how graphic novels are real books. And by which I mean, I would like to hear a little bit about how you came to write graphic novels and how you see them as part of the literary landscape. Because obviously all of us are here because we value this as a form of literature. We think that this is an important way to tell stories and that it is an essential method of reaching people that's unlike anything else. So I would just love to hear each of you talk a little bit about what drew you to comics, either as a child or to create these specific ones, and how you think about them in the larger world.
I guess I'll just go first. I started really getting into comics when I was 7 or 8 years old. My dad is a professor, and when I was that age, my family moved to France for a year when he was on sabbatical. And my brother and I, my little brother and I, didn't know the language at all. And we were just sent to the local village school and sort of had to learn by immersion. And my parents were willing to buy me all of these graphic novels, these comics, to help me learn the language better. So I started reading a lot of Tintin, a lot of Asterix. Those were the big ones. They had My Little Pony comics back then, which I know they have again, but there was a long period in between the 80s and like the 2000s when there were no My Little Pony comics. Yeah. So that was when I really got hooked in on comics, came back to the US and didn't really read them until high school when I got really into manga and into indie comics, Dan Clowes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then I just kept on reading them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely also had a very strong manga phase in the midst of my appreciation of Western graphic novels as well. And that's a really interesting story about learning the French through comics. I know I've heard from some people that sometimes people will come into my bookstore and they have friends who speak English as a second language and they want to get graphic novels for them for that purpose. But I hadn't heard about it the other way around. So that's very cool. Ursula or Jerry or
Ursula.
Sure. So like Hope, I am a second or third generation nerd. My father and my mom were big comics readers, also academics, but it didn't matter what we were reading as long as we were reading. So there were the collections of Doonesbury and Bloom County, and then all of the comics that I was able to bring home and carry around and haul them around. And then when I started ditching out of high school and hiding in the local public library, I found that the spot that you couldn't see from the door had all the alternative and independent comics that were collected from the 60s and 70s and 80s. So I would sit there for hours reading Dykes to Watch Out For and all of the collected Raw comics and Barbara Brandencroft's work and all of these sort of collected things. And I didn't realize that you could grow up and be a comic book artist until I started to go to college. And somebody saw me drawing in the student union and they went, wow, you can draw. And I said, well, you know, it's like saying, okay, you can breathe, but what good does it do me? And they said, well, we'll give you $10 a week to draw a comic strip. And I was like, oh, cool. That is amazing. So I really haven't looked back since then.
Well, your first gig was a paying gig. That's, you know, that's not something to come back from. There you go. $10 a week. Heck.
Yeah, up until about 2 years ago, I was still getting $10 a week. So I was wondering if I had made the right decision.
You need to draw in more student unions. I think
exactly.
that's the moral.
Yeah, I find that a lot of writers and artists are either in one or two camps. They absolutely grew up loving to read and loving the libraries, or like myself, hated to read and did not like going to libraries. The library was kind of a scary place that you only had to go to when you had to do a term paper. You know, I did not have friendly librarians. They were not colorful. It was literally like, you know, out of some Tom Hanks movie where he's trying to discover something and, you know, everyone, shh, you know, that was my experience. So thank goodness for Marvel Comics. You know, I started with my brother and sister's collection of reading Daredevil and Spider-Man and X-Men and Silver Surfer, and didn't realize how much it shaped my vocabulary, but you know, being able to know words like Armageddon and spectacular and, you know, astonishing and uncanny and macabre and, you know, annihilation. It's like, hey, you know, this is, you know, but my teachers thought that they would rot your brain. So they would confiscate comics. And it really wasn't until I was like late high school, college, where I started reading a little bit more, but I didn't read for enjoyment until I was an adult. So it's why I love doing comics now, is that I want someone like me, 10-year-old Jerry Kraft, to be able to pick up my stuff and go, wow, I never thought I liked to read either, and now I really do. Mm-hmm. And that's why, you know, I always give shout outs to other, you know, authors and graphic novel friends and people like that, because it is really important.
Yeah, that's I started getting a lot of feedback after I did Wrinkle in Time from parents of kids who were reluctant readers who just never wanted to read books, that this was the first book that the graphic novel version that I did was the first book that this kid had read on their own. And I just kept hearing that over and over and over again. And that was one of the things that made me really want to shift firmly into middle grade and doing stuff for even a slightly younger age than I had been before. I was doing more YA type stuff before that, because it just means so much to do some of the first books that connect with a reader. That is just the coolest thing. And that's one of the things that is so special to me about comics, so they have that power. The kids who are intimidated by just a block of prose, kids who can't relate to a character that they can't see a picture of, those kids can connect to comics.
Yeah. And it's funny, as we were talking in the green room, I have adults, you know, teachers, you know, who are saying, you know, I find graphic novels really hard to read. And then some reluctant reader borrows the book and has read it 3 times. It's like, oh, Miss So-and-so, you have to read this because we could talk about it tomorrow. And she's like, oh my goodness, I had to read it because he's never read a book before, but it was hard for me. So he had to help me. And like, nice, kind of level the playing field.
Yeah, it's such a different kind of literacy. So go ahead.
Oh, no. But this is, I'm going to get on my comics history soapbox for a little bit and say this is all a direct legacy of Frederick Wortham and the seduction of the innocent. So in the 1950s, this fellow came in and wrote a book saying that comic books and the content of comic books were rotting young minds, right? And it was teaching them to do crimes and to be do bad things to other people. And so the comics industry, instead of saying like, dude, step off, people are reading, instead wrote a 200 itemized list of all the things that you couldn't have in comics anymore. So you couldn't have adult themes in comics. You couldn't have anything that showed police officers or people in the military doing anything wrong. You couldn't have werewolfism called out by name, right? So what did that leave? That led squeaky clean superheroes and funny animals. And so then now we're coming back to it and people are saying, well, comics are childish. It's like the Comics Code Authority was in place until 2011. And the last people to give it up was Archie. And then they come and say comics are childish.
Well, and I think what we're seeing now is really a cool sort of melding of the world of indie comics that you were sort of talking about before, Ursula, that came out of that ban, and the world of mainstream comics that tried to adhere to the ban. And they're sort of finally re-entering each other's spheres in a way where things that are edgy and complicated and dark and all of that can be in graphic novels and comics published by major houses and by major publishers, which I think is really fantastic. And actually what you were sort of saying about why you wanted to write for middle grade hope is one thing that I had the next question about. And I originally had just written it as a question, but yesterday we had a panel on graphic novels that cover nonfiction topics. And one of the panelists, his name's James Otis Smith. He just wrote a graphic novel called Black Heroes of the Wild West. That's a nonfiction graphic novel with 3 stories of real Black people who were part of the settler movement in the West. Really cool. But he had a quote where he said, I think of kids, he said, kids are just people who haven't read the same books I have. And I think that is such a smart way of articulating what I often feel about the kids that I'm recommending graphic novels to, which is like, they're not any less smart or less literate than I am. They just haven't gotten this book yet. And I think that relates to sort of what you were saying, but what I had wanted to ask even before I heard that amazing quote from James, was that why middle grade? What drew you to that audience? And even if, obviously, as I said at the beginning, all of your books sort of have like appeal outside of that, especially Ursula's, because it's cats. Everybody loves cats. But, especially for Hope and Jerry, yours are very specifically set in middle schools. So I'm curious about what it is about that age group that you find both exciting and challenging to write for.
Do you want to go first, Jerry?
Well, sure. It's funny, like, I grew up in a time where so much of the stuff that was for kids taught a lesson or morals or something, like I grew up watching like a Fat Albert, and then Charlie Brown, Peanuts. But then in between the cartoons, the Saturday morning cartoons, you'd have like Schoolhouse Rock, Multiplication Rock, and to date, if I still need to remember what the conjunction is, I sing the song in my head. And I go, oh yeah, hooking up words and phrases and clauses. Got it. And so I realized that, you can have such an impact that here I am, 100 years later, still remembering those lessons. And so to be able to write something and draw it and have a kid go, oh, you know what? Maybe when I see a kid off by themselves, I shouldn't pick on them. I could, extend a hand. I can say, hey, let's have lunch. Or even if I'm not going to go that extra step, at least don't be a jerk about it. Yeah. And one of the things about graphic novels, this is kind of going backwards a step, so forgive me, but I had a bookseller tweet at me that dad went into a bookstore with his kid, and the dad's like, hey, Dad, can I get a graphic novel? And he's like, nah, get a real book. And she was like, hey, do you know a graphic novel just won the Newbery? And he's like, really? Oh, in that case, get whatever you want. So I was like, yes, team graphic novel. So it's just really, I think, sometimes still undervalued, but any time that you get a reluctant reader to read a book 3 times and want to discuss it, I think should be taken seriously.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Did you want to?
Oh, I was just going to say,
I've
often had like a sort of similar interaction where it's, no, get a real book. But if I say, there's nothing wrong with being a visual learner or a visual understander. And when I put it in that context, I think a lot of times it helps adults understand why a kid would be drawn to something that gives them a bit of an assist with the visual of a story rather than something that has to be purely words. It breaks through the elitism of words only books, or what I had a teacher who would call them boring no picture books. And and I've always enjoyed that reframing because I think it really it captures something that is different and magical.
Okay, so I think the question was basically like why middle grade? What drew us to middle grade comics? Okay. For me, I really like a plottier sort of book. I like to write stuff with a fair amount of plot and less like internal anguish, which is something that I associate more with YA. I know that's a very broad stroke. I know there's a huge spectrum, but for me, a lot of the themes of YA don't necessarily translate super well to a visual medium. YA for me has a lot to do more with like sexual awakening and, it's more adult basically. And those things can be a lot harder to portray visually. It's the kind of material that can get your book shut out of like a school library. And because I am drawn to more adventure-y, plotty type stories anyway, it's a lot easier for me to just downshift a little bit content-wise into middle grade than go up into YA and feel like I'm creating this book that it's not going to be acceptable to a lot of parents and younger people won't be able to get their hands on it. Does that make sense?
I think that makes total sense. And like, I actually, one of the things I really appreciated, I won't say anything specific, but I really appreciated in Altogether Now that you're very honest about the way that like kids having crushes on each other in middle school affects friendships and affects like close ties between people. And I think the way that you talked about it, I think sometimes in middle grade, people get scared of portraying crushes as anything more than adorable. And middle schoolers are, they can be adorable, but they can also be not adorable at all. And, being honest with the kids who are experiencing that, I think is important. But it's funny that you brought up what you said about YA, because I did another middle grade graphic novel panel yesterday. And in that one, we were also talking about like the difference between YA and middle grade. And that we were talking about sort of how middle grade is a little bit more, it seems to welcome a cast instead of an individual perspective. Like I think YA tends to emphasize like individual and internal perspectives. And because there's a lot of internal growth that happens between the ages of 13 and 18, and that you get very in your head. And I think that's natural for that to be a narrative in that age group. But for middle grade, I think there is sort of more of a cast. Like there's more, you can do like a group novel. And I think all of your books reflect that in some way. So I think that lends itself extra to the graphic novel format as well, because it's not over focused on one person.
So I had no idea that A Cat Story was a middle grade graphic novel until my brilliant agent looked at it and said, Ursula, this is a kid's book. And I was like, really? She went, yeah. I was like, oh, well, great, cool. Because I love 11-year-olds, man. Give me a room full of smart 11-year-olds. And you just come out of it with your brain perforated. Like they have wonderful questions. And it is the time when they are figuring out who they are, right? Like if YA is a time of expansion into competency of self, then middle grade is the time when they are playing and learning and putting on hats and becoming, as my friend Stuart Clipper, the photographer, says, everything that he has done professionally, he was obsessed with at age 11, right? So exploration and Antarctica and cameras, which he calls himself bipolar. He's been to both of the poles, north and south. He's very good. For things that, and, I'll let him know that you appreciated his joke. I thought it was funny. But those were the books and the things that he was reading about when he was 11. So like Hope and Jerry have both sort of said in various ways, I'll put the button on that to say, like, if my book can be part of that obsessive time, that is such an honor. That is such a wonderful place to be. That maybe something that is coming out of my storytelling is going to work their way into their brains in the way that so many books work their way into, my brain at 11. So
I just wish they didn't take so long to make, because I would really love to really have a story where I could release one every like 6 months to keep the kids going, but I would be like, I'd look like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
I don't even know how you got books out in consecutive years, Jerry.
I don't know how. You know what happened?
How?
I have to say the one, and I hate to say anything good about this year in quarantine, but the fact that there was nowhere to go and you're just afraid to leave the house. I mean, I literally worked from the day we were quarantined till like 6 o'clock in the morning every day. I literally finished this book like June 16th of this year. And when I tell you that they put a speed on it to get it ready by October, because with New Kid, I finished in January 2017 and it came out February 2018. So it's like 13 months. Or something like that. It took a year, whatever I did.
That's the standard for me.
And when I put on my calendar, like literally like, hey, just handed this in today. And I looked back yesterday, it's like June 18th. So yeah.
Wow.
So that's what the quarantine did. It brought the world-class act this year.
Well, you know what? We can always use a silver lining, and I'm happy to hear that silver lining. We're getting a little bit short on time, so I'm going to get to some of the audience questions. And if anybody else in the audience has additional questions, you can toss them into the chat, or you can put them in the Ask a Question button at the bottom. But I just want to make sure that we get to these because I don't want to short anybody in the audience who's been tensely waiting, as I do when I put in an audience question. I'm going to start with the top one here. What was the editing process like with your graphic novels? It seems like it would be different than a full prose novel, which I'm sure it is. So could each of you give like a little bit of a spiel about your editing process?
Sure. I typically write a full script, edit that with the editor. Then I do a rough draft, like a pencil version of the whole book with the letters in place. We edit that, edit the inks, just edit at every stage, and then tons of copy editing at the end. So I try and build in I have a very hands-on editor. Actually, I've worked with a couple of editors. One is super hands-on, one is slightly less hands-on. They're both great. And I basically just try to build in as many opportunities for feedback from my editor without me like throwing out everything or having to do massive restructuring before the art comes into play.
That makes perfect sense. I would not want to have to rewrite huge chunks of art either. That sounds terrifying. Jerry, what was your editorial process like?
I go almost right to thumbnails just because I can't separate the art from the writing, and I know initially like, oh, you could write it out. And my agent, who's the same as Ursula's, is like, oh, have all these different ways of submitting. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do the thumbnails and actually put the word balloons in so that I am used to pre-HarperCollins having to spell everything out. And if people don't get your vision, so I was always used to like, look, there's no way to go wrong. This is what I'm doing. And that's just kind of what I'm used to. So I give it, and they give the feedback, and we move chapters around. But it's been really great there.
As an aside, I think we all have the same agent.
That's what I was going to say.
Ursula
so
quoted her, and I was like,
funny.
that sounds like Judy.
It is. She's wonderful. Thank you.
She is wonderful.
Well, she's clearly got great taste, just like us, to have all three of you. So there you go.
So I always feel weird when I talk about my process because it's so different than anybody else's, but I tend to have a list of the major plot points, and then I'll do thumbnails of the pages before I have the dialogue. And then I'll work in rough dialogue in the thumbnails of the pages, and then that gets feedback. And then I wind up drawing everything. And then there is a very detailed process of making sure that all the dialogue is correct. And that's something that I will sit down with my brilliant brother, who is an actor and a director, and we read back and forth the dialogue until it sounds right, because I am most fluent with drawing and I am less fluent with the writing. So working with my brother and making sure that all of the scripts actually match what I've drawn is usually the last step, and editorial at each of those steps.
That's so interesting. There was another panel yesterday where somebody said that for their they had like a novel that was a fictional oral history, and they said that they hired a whole cast of actors to come in and read all of the different people who were contributing to the oral history. And so that seems like very similar to what you're talking about, that you just like sit down and like almost table read your graphic novel with your brother. I think that's so cool. Well, we have one final, oh, sorry, go.
It's less of a table read, and it's more like, here's the rough thing that I want the character to say in this panel. What is the shortest way that they can say that? And what way does it sound most natural in that character's voice? Because it's very difficult, especially when you have non-human characters, making sure that they sound as distinct as they look.
And can I just say one thing to kids watching or teachers, that we all have our very distinct ways. So whatever's comfortable for you, like I could not necessarily do Hope's version, but I can do mine and Ursula does hers. So just whatever is comfortable, that's the part about being an artist, being creative. It's just kind of like whatever floats your boat, whatever gets the job done.
There's no standard way to make a graphic novel. Everybody has their own process that they have come to through trial and error, and that's fine. That's great.
And it's different for every book we do. There will, like, depending if you have a different voice or a different thing, process changes per the book. So don't feel like you need to sit down with this specific pen and this specific paper and then write it out first or draw it out first. Like, oh, cartoonists, we are all different. And if you are a cartoonist, you're different too.
Do you do digital or traditional?
I do like a hybrid.
Yeah. So what's your hybrid, Hope?
Well, my process is actually like it's shifting right now. I think I might be going totally digital for the next thing I do. But I used to be doing digital pencils, printing them off Blue Line, and then doing tight pencils and inks on top of that by hand, like on paper, and then scanning it back in. But I think I'm probably going to be doing the next thing all iPad.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I did both books on this right here, my Wacom Intuos Pro, so in Photoshop.
So I do the digital thumbnails, and then I print them out, and then I just do my finished tight inks over that, because most of my thinking is with ink. And if I have to do a tight pencil, it cooks all the life out of it for me.
Huh. This is so interesting. Thank you all so much for getting in on this. We had a similar question to that one, but the third and final question, which I'll just have us shoot through real quick, is what are your current favorite graphic novels?
Jen Wang, Prince and the Dressmaker is great. And I'm going to go with This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki.
Those are both gorgeous.
As far as current, I would say Almost American Girl by Robin Ha.
The Rabbi's Cat by Jean Sfar. lives in my heart as the most beautiful book that I think anybody's drawn since Will Eisner drew A Contract with God. But I really like Salamander Dreams by Hope. I'm gonna
thank
call it
you.
back. I always thought that one was middle grade, though.
Well, I mean, that was my first book, so I don't think I'd ever heard of middle grade then.
It's just a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I remember laughing so hard at New Kid because we have the same editor. And they sent me the advanced reading copy, and I'm like, what is this? And then it got to the point where there's the Scholastic Book Fair in this book. It was just so funny.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a really delightful panel, and I am so glad to be able to read all of your work and to get to talk to you. Thank you to everybody who attended the panel as well. Of course, you can purchase the books from all of these wonderful people and the ones that they just recommended to you as well, if you wanted, probably, at the Buy Books button that's right below your screen, which is from our local independent bookselling partner, Red Balloon Books. And you should come on out to the rest of the events of the festival, or if you want to watch any of the previous ones, they're available on replay as well. So we have everything you could possibly want to watch here for you. And we thank you for coming out for this one live. All right.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you all so much for
Thank you.
Bye.